Henry?
Hi, bro. How's it going?
Oh, it's going all right. How are you?
Have we technically started or not? I'm still confused.
God, I hope not. Let's see if I can start my video here. What a year. I mean, between the pandemic, Bitcoin did we officially make a new all-time high? I guess we did, didn't
I
we?
think on one day it did. So
Yeah.
from Forbes or one of the other ones reported it as
Yeah, it's sort of like just nipped above really quick. And then we had the launch of Ethereum 2, and well, it's been quite an eventful week. Henry, thank you for coming on to our Twitch broadcast. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
about myself or about how I end up in crypto, I guess is the better story. So
Yeah, that's that too.
well, there's one and the same thing. So yeah, I started in theoretical physics, which is everyone gets interested in that you started this. So I started working in directed acyclic graphs, but as a part of, well, one of the things I was writing about was quantum gravity. So there is a thing called causal set theory, which is based on directed acyclic graphs. So, you know, that and all the other stuff where my PhD supervisor also works on these topics. So yeah, it was about 2015. And then someone said, oh, you know, DAGs are used for other things. And I was like, oh, really? Because I actually was in the exotic use case. Well, I would say the very exotic use case of what a DAG is, which is a directed acyclic graph. So basically it means an arrow pointing to something else, which doesn't go back on itself. That would be a cycle. So you can't go back in time, which is why it's using quantum, like causal gravity stuff. So you can do, oh yeah, well, causal set theory, quantum gravity. So they use it. So, oh, event A goes to event B,
which
C,
goes to C, yeah.
Whereas if you went back from C to A again, that would be a cycle. So remember, it's a directed acyclic graph, so that would be allowed. So that actual fundamental structure, where you basically sprinkle little moments, well, they're granular space-time, and connect the dots within the allowable light cone. So like what is accessible via, you know, what is accessible in the speed of light. That is literally what it means. And you connect the dots up and you sprinkle them the right way, and it actually does replicate general relativity or like space-time structure. So,
God, that's amazing.
So, but yeah, the problem with space-time normally is you can keep zooming in, so it's continuous. So you keep going and zooming in and everywhere.
Yeah, it's like the when you're editing a QuickTime movie, you know, where you keep broadening out the down to the pixelated level, you know, you can.
Well, so the pixelated level is the Planck scale, and that's where you go, oh, you need something else, and also happens to the edge of black holes. So there's some interest in like a discrete version of space-time.
Well, it all breaks down at that point, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Or
So that's when you have to pick the Planck scale, which is why all the relativity stuff kind of breaks down at the Planck scale. But then they say, okay, well, let's talk about this, because if you look about like water and pouring water, that, you know, one level you can say, oh, that's just water, and then you can eventually go down to the atom level and explain everything away. But it's perfectly happy to observe it as a flowing liquid with all the properties at that level. You don't need to go to like atomic physics to work out how water works. Right. You can say, well, this is a table. You know, if I throw a chair at you, I just need to track the center of mass to know it's going to hit you. I don't need to in a chair, right? So there's always, you can observe systems at like large and small scales. So that's always been the fundamental problem in physics, is the theories of the very small don't match up with the theories of the very big. And yeah, so DAGs come into it at the very small level, but like causal reality, as it were. So, but then someone said they use it for Bitcoin. so
yeah. And that was, and literally that was it. And you were kind of like, what is this sorcery that's using DAGs in this completely unrelated field? And
well, actually, apparently it's the correct field. So computer science has obviously been using these chains of hashes since, I mean, the 50s or the 60s even. They kind of have to chain things together. And again, you don't want to go back on yourself. So obviously, if you have something immutable in a ledger, again, you don't want to point to things you haven't done already, or so it breaks. There's a kind of a time history elements. You kind of can get into those paradoxes if you could have cycles, but you can't.
Of course.
Yeah, and I was looking into IOTA at the time, which is a tangly DAG, trying to solve the problems to do with having a block, because obviously you have to wait so long for a block, and it has to be in one block, and then you have another block, and that's kind of restrictive. So yeah, I was looking at those. This is 2015, and then yeah, I got involved with one of my other supervisors, who's like a French quant, and then we were working on the Bitcoin futures. So I'm completely changed gears, really. So then I started doing finance more formally with her and stuff. So that's
yeah. And now you're at GCex. So wow, that is quite the career switcheroo. How do you feel about it? I mean, you're having fun?
Moving to regulated financial services. I think it's a really good match. So as I said, you know, when Lars kind of hired me, one of the early people, he just needed to kind of, he comes from an FX traditional background, and a lot of people are interested in this stuff, but they don't really understand it. And I think, you know, a lot of people, and still that's the case now, a lot of people are very interested. They just don't know how to get in on the game. They can see that things are happening. They can see it's a very exciting space. And I kind of would regard myself more like a tour guide of the kind of absurd nature of cryptocurrencies, I think.
It is a, yeah, it is a wonderful, weird, wide world that gets weirder every day, I feel like. I feel like, you know, you're in a really interesting spot, because there is this sort of tension that's been happening and naturally has to get flattened in order for the market to grow. And that, and I'm going to say something controversial, of course, but the largest segment of capital markets with the most available pools of capital to play in this space, which I think if we all want it to grow and succeed, you know, and reach the potential it needs to reach, we want those folks to come into this world. But there is quite a bit of challenging sort of roadblocks just by virtue of the way that cryptocurrencies are constructed, you know, and Bitcoin is constructed, that make it an educational challenge at the best of times for a lot of these folks. And then, you know, throw up things like regulatory hurdles and operational hurdles and, you know, all trade flows and working within their governance frameworks. And it becomes a little bit overwhelming. And so as a tour guide, what do you think are kind of the main hot button issues when you're dealing with folks that are sort of going like, please teach me, kind sir, you know?
I think it's getting easier and easier now, right? Because you've got sort of JP Morgan coming out saying, oh, crypto's okay now. And then you got Fidelity. I think recently they came out with a couple of papers, I think before the recent kind of bull run. So they're kind of warming up to it, but they still don't know how to access the markets.
Yeah.
So the fundamental technology, they're kind of like, okay, I get it. There's this kind of finality element. It kind of exists outside of traditional finance. But now we want to bring it back in. Okay, that's okay. We can just kind of do it like this. Well, now where do we put it? Where do I put my do I put it on a USB stick? I've had people describe this to me. And then luckily, I think then, well, not luckily, but a few days afterwards, it was the famous Canadian exchange where the guy passed away and lost his keys. And then he finally believed couldn't have it as a USB in the cupboard and stuff like that. It's quite interesting. So
what I loved was that, like, if you peruse their website before everything hit the fan, you know, they went on and on about like, well, your funds are secured in our cold storage facility, and kind of a big song and dance about it, when it turns out their cold storage facility was this dude's laptop, and the security was his password. And that, I think that's such a great example of, you know, the things that we need to do better on as an industry, sort of that lack of transparency and everything else. But yeah, so
I think they don't know really how to handle this. So I think, you know, people, because again, I even did some stuff where distinguishing, you know, crime insurance versus specie insurance. Do you regard that USB stick like a work of art that someone can steal, or is there this kind of whole like additional kind of attack point where you can obviously see it as a hacking, or is it like a Van Gogh in the cupboard? So
yeah,
I think even ironing out what it is and how you protect it, I think it's only, I would say, a year, maybe. Even since I started at GCex, when we first started, I think there wasn't as many custody players, there wasn't as many regulatory players. But now we have the FCA crypto asset registration. Hong Kong's come out and said, we're going to be regulated. I think every country is kind of adopting its own frameworks.
Which is going to make the challenge even more acute, I think, for a lot of industry players. How are you guys looking at dealing with that? What do you think is going to be kind of the future of regulatory frameworks and cooperation across nation states in the next 3 or 5 years? You think things like the travel rule will come into force? Do you think it's even feasible?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, that was the FCA registration is mainly about AML D5. So that's the first point they're going to be interested in, is if you are a custodian or party to crypto trades, where are the source of those funds? And if I hand them over, well, that's another good point I think people don't realize is crypto exchanges in general, if they're a big omnibus wallet, effectively you got all the transactions coming in and then some going out. So it's like a Bitcoin mixer, but it's not a mixer, obviously. So if people want to kind of hide their transactional behavior, it's best to kind of pool it with a bunch of people and then put it out to, so that is what a mixer is. So I think, being able to transmit between institutions the information about the clients and the provenance of the coins is the obvious next step for regulators to step in and just say, okay, well, I get you that there's this whole tracking, because obviously Bitcoin is kind of a super audit trail back to whenever you had it. But
sure.
If you have this mixer in the mix, you can basically kind of sidestep that. So yeah, the first step, I guess, is to put all these exchanges and kind of larger custodians into a position where they have to report, whose is whose, which Bitcoin is whose, and where did it come from as they transmit it to other financial institutions. So that's their first step. And then they have this kind of VASP framework, right? Is it virtual asset? That was the
service provider, virtual asset service provider. Yeah.
That's the dream, but I don't know when they're going to implement it. But I think the first step is to bring it under AML first, right?
Yeah. And then try and harmonize everything under FATF, but it's certainly a challenge for incumbent players and upstart challengers alike, I think, in terms of like, how do we actually create a messaging framework that can be not abused, is encrypted end to end, has the security safeguards and privacy safeguards in it, but at the same time, will accomplish the end goal and objective to try and dissuade, or at least put some sort of audit trail on keeping the flow of funds clean between these various different entities.
Well, I think it's almost impossible, right? Because, well, it's not, it's completely possible. That's the other thing. But you're basically reconciling two completely different worlds.
See this, yeah, exactly. This is it.
Satoshi Nakamoto basically saying, okay, this is, the first blockchain message is, about the banks being bailed out. So it's kind of completely, it's basically the answer to a financial system built by central parties. And now you want to bring them back underneath. So I think initially Bitcoin obviously is going to lead because everyone understands it, like almost, exactly how it works.
It's where you start. Yeah, exactly.
And then maybe they can create AML tools for Ethereum and the ones that follow afterwards. But yeah, even getting this under their kind of full understanding in AML frameworks is going to be complicated.
Yeah, we've been cooking up a few ideas over here about how layer twos would get into the act and maybe satisfy some of those requirements, but do it in a way that it's a real fine line. The internal teenage anarchist in me really kind of has a problem with it, but then of course the adult in me is like, well, of course we don't want to propagate activities that would, be funneling money around from child slavery or prostitution or, things of that nature. So this whole conundrum really fits within that slice of the pie. That's like, okay, how does this industry grow up and attract capital markets participants into it that, take it above and beyond the crypto anarchist realm? And there'll be a lot of folks out there that are like, it can't ever go beyond that,
But from both sides, right? You'll have the traditional finance guys who just can't ever get their head around this kind of object. It's basically worthless to them because it's this thing a guy made up, and put on the blockchain, and they hear about it, but they can't see any tangible value. They just see miners burning, fossil fuels or whatever to create it, and they just kind of dismiss it out of hand. And then you've got the kind of hardcore, like you said, crypto anarchists who would never give up their private keys to anyone. This is the whole point, is fundamentally you holding your own keys and being able to lose them is the fundamental freedom of existing outside of the centralized system.
And I kind of fundamentally believe that, but I don't think that has to be sacrificed on the altar of this effort, perhaps. I don't know.
There's things you can do, but they always, like I said, I think the Ethereum kind of boom, especially with the decentralized exchanges, is the kind of another gasp from those guys being like, yeah, we don't need an exchange. Can't you see? We don't need an exchange. And then there's everyone else going, well, if you want to play with the big players and all this, you need an exchange because we need to. going on.
Yeah, a central limit order book run by an entity that you can go and, choke their throat if it goes down. I don't think that's ever going to go out of style, right? Like, I mean, that that's why the New York Stock Exchange exists. So yeah, I understand the effort being put into that. I don't know if it will ever take hold, catch fire, and succeed in that way.
I think it's as long as the counterparties can be, that's the main thing is with these decentralized exchanges, both you can show your position. So obviously you're kind of trading in public. I mean, no one knows who they are, but if you did find out who they were, you can then,
Exactly. Well, it's pretty easy to work backwards if you had to,
the anonymization or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But then they're still outside the existing regulatory framework, so they're never going to play with the other guys. And so every time, but I do feel sometimes they do step on stuff, and then it kind of comes up. So I'm really interested to see what the crypto space kind of invents, because it's however you see each new, I would say, iteration of the technology, there's always something really interesting that you could bring into I would say the traditional space. So if you're using distributed ledger technologies, maybe you don't need a fully decentralized ledger, but maybe something that's kind of semi-centralized or private blockchains with, again, like smart contracts. They're designed to remove a third party, but they can also be used to kind of ensure transactions go through, or finality in a kind of quasi-public blockchain. And I was trying to read out when it was invented, and it was like 2012 or something. And I'm surprised that, well, I guess I'm not that surprised, but exchanging between two ledgers, fundamental like kind of ledgers in public, is only kind of been described in like 2012. And that's super interesting, because it's kind of a child of what Bitcoin started, but you could still use it in a traditional context.
I mean, so shameless plug. Obviously, Qredo is working on a layer 2 to enable kind of your basic functionality like cross-chain atomic swaps, and with some security guarantees around that, and doing it in a decentralized manner that starts with the premise that custody should be decentralized, oddly enough, and having kind of a crazy sort of view on that, which I think it was interesting, because when we started, people literally looked at us like we were nuts. They're like, how are you going to decentralize custody? That's the most bonkers thing I've heard. I've got to send it to a cold storage custodian. But it's funny, the pendulum starts kind of swinging, towards, I guess they call it the Overton window, right? Where it's like initially, that's the most crazy idea I've ever heard, man. And then, about a month or 6 months, or depending on how rapidly the window moves, then people are like, okay, yeah, that's not so crazy. Let we can have a chat about it. But yeah, it's going to be very, very interesting to see, between sort of the necessity to, for lack of a better term, grow up and grow into the capital markets kind of infrastructure and organizational and governance frameworks that have been around for 40 or 50 years. Also, where that Overton window goes in terms of like, okay, how much more can we decentralize everything? Because I think, I don't know what your point of view is. I'm not one of those folks that says like, well, everything should be decentralized and that's the way it goes, and it's got to be completely crypto anarchist. I sort of fall somewhere in between the two, probably depending on, which way the wind blows when I wake up in the morning. Yeah, no, exactly.
I think, moving towards a more decentralized, the systems which have more redundancy is kind of a general observation. I think since the last financial crash or any of these things, everyone's thinking, well, why is it all so hidden,
brittle, yeah,
in one place? I mean, these are the two things that blockchains and DLT solves, right? Why is it so in there? Why is it there? And if that goes down, everything goes down. And why is it like I don't know any of the flows to that thing? Like, so those
nobody does. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting listening to Caitlin Long, the gal from Wyoming. I listened to her on like Laura Shin's podcast, and she was explaining the T+2, T+3 settlement times that are necessary for these long, and why it takes so long. And it sort of blew my mind, because I'm like, holy cow, these systems don't even talk to each other.
It's because I came in completely cold to FX maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah,
I thought BPS was beats per second as well, not basic. Because I was dealing with crypto before, and obviously theoretical physics, so you become quite far from this. And yeah, I couldn't understand that they had all these value dates, depending on which instrument you're trading. And then now we're actually doing kind of composite instruments. So we have one leg in one delivery date, one on the other. And that's where stable coins are coming, I guess, as well. But yeah, it's super interesting how, yeah, it's kind of leftover. I don't know, like you said, it's no one's talking to each other. And it's just leftover bits and bobs, I guess.
Yeah, it's 40 years of like systems that in some cases are like still running on these like COBOL mainframes, and like they're so brittle and fragile that they can't modify them to actually communicate outside their little walled garden, because like having known like family members in IT that work at banks and stuff, it's like, oh man, don't even look at that thing. Don't look at that thing, because if you look at it the wrong way, it's going to fall over and like the entire banking system will collapse. So
what's the duct tape to that holds the client?
Duct tape, barbed wire, held together with duct tape, barbed wire, and ball bearings. So I think you're right. In one sense, this is.
You also highlight another point, is that everyone knows it doesn't work or it's not very good, but they keep going. So it's kind of, how do you get them over? So I think, because this kind of, I guess it's not really it's like, I would say a running joke, but I guess it's not really a joke. But the fact that there's all these different value dates and all this, it's something you teach people when they first arrive in the industry, and then they go, why is it like that? And they're like, I don't really know, actually, but there are historical reasons, but this isn't history. This is like people's money. So it's
exactly. But it's all historical reasons. It's literally the organic growth of these systems that have been sort of congealed together in a way that makes it possible to work. But it's certainly like, to an outsider coming in, or somebody's in like computer science or resilient systems design, you sort of look at it and you go, oh my God, that really, and you kind of freak out and you're like, yeah, I could see why people think that, the financial system could blow up one day, just, sort of, what was that movie with Brad Pitt and Ed Norton, Fight Club. Yeah. It's a Fight Club kind of style blowout, at the end of the movie, where it's like, oh, we all reset back to year zero.
I think getting computer scientists involved in this is quite a recent idea, I think before that, I remember there was another quote I read somewhere where they've got, fintechs, before they used to think, oh, they could hire computer scientists, bring them on board. But now a lot of these industries are run by computer scientists thinking, why do I need an MBA grad? So before hiring these people, and now kind of the quant people kind of sit there and just like, why do I need an MBA to tell me? Well, in reality, it's because they got better social skills and they can like close the deal. So I see the value as well there.
You know what though? I guess I see that. but at the same time, don't you want to talk to like the authoritative source? I think that's also been the great thing about sort of our little industry sort of kind of getting the spotlight shown on them, is that it's forced the technologists and maybe the people that weren't able to fully espouse an idea from a commercial standpoint, or even have the skills to sort of be conversationalist and convincing at the same time. It's sort of forced those folks to get into that role, to propagate their ideas in a way that has also cut out that middleman. You know what I mean? Like I think that's actually the most exciting thing, is that like, when you go to a blockchain, some project's website, like, unless there's like a white paper there with like some real hardcore math and like, I want to see like in the full gory detail how this thing works. So I'm kind of like, oh, this is snake oil. You know what I mean? So it's,
that's 2017 should have been called the year of the snake oil, I think.
Yeah, totally. But I think it's been the great game changers that, I hope it stays that way.
I think it's also brought kind of me, a more logical person, to consider like other more holistic aspects of the business as well. I think a lot of the time you've got people shouting from the sidelines of sense, why don't things work like this? If you, a bit like I said, because I think we meant to talk about smart contracts, but I guess, counterparty A does this and then counterparty B does this. If this is, and actually humans don't quite work like that. So I think this is always going to be slightly problematic until we get something a bit more soft together. Because again, it's like, why can't business be a bit more like computers talking to each other? Because then it would definitely work, right? Because party A would do this and then they would do this. And this is like, fine. It's like, no, humans are not like computers at all when you start to talk about like
Just even counterparty risk, you know what I mean? Like it's one of the things that we kind of got a rude shock on, and kind of one of our first designs was like, oh, well, you can do a cross-chain atomic swap like this, and nobody has counterparty risk. Well, as it turns out, that's actually not kind of acceptable to folks in the capital markets. There is a little element of counterparty risk that they want the exchange or one of the counterparties to have, right? So engineering something that's perfect, no counterparty risk example was actually like, oh,
to literally build the imperfect thing, right? Because it replicates, it also replicates the regulatory framework or the expectations of the client. So it's quite an interesting.
So it was a sterling example of where we're like, oh, we've got it. Oh, actually, no, we don't have it. Go back to the drawing board. But I think that's the other really interesting thing that this industry is going to, be able to
call for change, right? It's like, I think the computer scientists are now kind of getting involved in, again, it's like they're meeting this kind of imperfect world and going, actually, you can do it like this, but you can now bring in aspects. I think that's the way, that's the best way.
It's a mix of humanities, computer science, the humanist part of the whole thing. Yeah. All right. So look, I think we, I don't know. Are we running up to our allotted time here? Or I think we've got like 5 more minutes or 3 more minutes.
Yeah. So I guess, I don't know. I was kind of interested in, because anyway, I didn't even do your introduction, or you don't require an introduction. I know you're from more of the traditional cryptographics.
Yeah, I mean, my background is really, before I got into cryptocurrency, was like enterprise cryptography for 20 plus years. Talk about a left field science. Yeah, I was working at actually, I started off as a programmer working at RSA data security in in a technical role, and then I was terrible programmer, so they moved me into
terrible everything. That's my I'm kind of 80% of everything, so I can just
yeah, exactly. I was a very generalist, but they're like, you actually know what the RSA algorithm is. You should try talking to customers about it. So I ended up licensing the RSA algorithm to folks, and when I was still living in Silicon Valley, like in the mid 90s, and
so before it was proper Silicon Valley, I guess. Or
it was Silicon Valley. Yeah, it was still Silicon Valley. It wasn't quite the, I think it's changed a lot since I left for London.
They always say 10 years ago. Back in my day.
Yeah.
Numbers, and they weren't this length. They were short.
I remember when you used to drive the 280 from San Francisco to San Jose in an hour, and now it takes 4 hours. I think that's like everybody's sort of like benchmark, is where it goes to. Yeah, but I don't know. My background is not as interesting as yours.
No, I mean I just end up in the wrong place. A lot of people are physicists. I think it's an interesting space. I think physicists tend to want to break things and experiment with things. So I think it's quite naturally to fall into this area. So I mean, I've tried to stay always on the regulated side because I'm a bit too conservative. But I'm a terrible programmer, a terrible physicist, terrible everything really. So it somehow makes me a good crypto guide.
Yeah, exactly. I to sum up, I hope this field welcomes more folks of your ilk into it, and it draws more folks of your.
Draws some really interesting guys, though. I mean, like the people I get to talk to, including from your team as well. Like I've been friends with some of them for longer, and it does interestingly. And the traditional side, who it draws, they're kind of people with a bit of I would say a little bit of a cheeky anarchist streak to them.
I think everybody initially. I remember when you. I remember when I first read the Bitcoin white paper. I was like, it blew my mind on several levels, but I also sort of didn't get it in a way. I was just like, God, I'd love to work with this thing, and I really hope it becomes like the reserve currency. It'll never happen. Because
that's why I also had it. But the people have been so interesting. So like I just said, I actually don't regret. Even if Bitcoin did go away, I think, the journey I've had and people I've met with the Ethereum, groups and stuff since then it's super interesting.
I've definitely met the coolest, brightest people in the industry. Across my industry experience has been working in this space, for sure.
Yeah.
That's why I hope it keeps going. Well, kind sir, thank you for gracing us with your presence and the chat.
Thank you for having me, and I just think, yeah, I'm super optimistic about the space. So that's what I want to end with, just saying, like, even if this atomic swap stuff is, I could just see the future. I couldn't believe it was 2012, and then you can just see the next thing could be. I mean, what's going to be after this, right? So, yeah, I think
I'm really excited about zero knowledge proofs. Obviously ZK rollups is having an impact.
It's all new. That's the crazy thing about it. It's all Satoshi wouldn't have even known about this, or couldn't have even. It's still post 2009, 2000.
It is. It is.
So much more to do, and there's so much more infrastructure and machinery behind it, and now there's money, and so yeah, I'm super excited actually.
Yeah, me too. Well, here's to the future.
You too, and I look forward to talking with you in the future, I think.
Yeah, sir, certainly, sir. All right, you have a good night, Mr. Prince. Thanks, Henry. Okay.
Bye.
Cheers, guys. Bye.
The skeletons you keep in your closet. It don't matter because you're working for what you always wanted. I walk by 6 dozen roses and they all say the same. Although that heart may pass, that grave still remains, and that pain.
Oh, well, all right. Well, that's fine. Then I'm gonna have a cookie. I could give you a virtual cookie.
You need to abide by GDPR now.
Yeah.